Thanks very much for having me. My name's Quinn Hart, and I'm at the University of California at Davis Library. And this is our first Fedora Users Meeting. So I'm very happy to be here. And so I thought what I would do is introduce how we're using Fedora at the library and kind of go from there. And this is actually a presentation that, whoops, let me go back one. This is a presentation that I gave to the University of California Library in general in 2019, which is about when we started our digital collections. And so it's kind of a brief overview, and I'm not sure it's at the right level, but I'll kind of go through it. So our system at digital@ucdavis.edu is basically looking at showing kind of special artifacts that are in the special collections at our library. So things that are relatively unique to that system. And it kind of has basically what you would expect to see from any kind of digital management system in terms of the searching, the organization by collection and object, and then the ability to drill into those individual objects and kind of look at the metadata and download particular versions of what you're looking at. And so there's nothing too unusual about the front end for that, and I welcome everybody to kind of look at that site if they're interested while I go through this talk. But I'm going to concentrate more on the way that we developed it and what some of our philosophies were for that. And so, like I said, this presentation is kind of a recycle of something that I did before. And one of the things that we wanted to make clear was that when we were developing our application for our resources, more than concentrating on just what the user experience is through the website, we really wanted to make sure that we were following standards that we thought had good longevity and that really provided some good basics for us. And so this is kind of the standards that we've sort of gone around: the Fedora specification, archival resource keys for identifiers, and then for us, we use a lot of schema.org and search engine optimization in order for doing our sharing. And at the time, Fedora 6 and the Oxford Common File Layout were just coming out, and so we were starting to think about what we would expect that to change the way that we've been doing our practices. And so, first of all, just to kind of describe our system, as I said, it's primarily unique items within the special collections here. And we use schema.org as our metadata standard for representing those. We like that a lot. It's very ubiquitous. It's very basic. There's lots of types that correspond to the types of information that we're putting in our system. And then when you combine that with search engine optimization, you get a really agnostic distribution method, so that the same way that we share our information with our partner libraries is the same way that Google can search things as well. And the way that we think of it is that inside that circle on the left, you can see that kind of the root of all of the objects that are inside our system are really the physical objects that we're describing. So when we have the metadata that's describing those components, we actually talk about what the material, what they might be made of, what they're, how they might look, where you might find them on the shelves. So then when we actually point to the digital representations of those, we actually use that through the organization of some of the predicates that are available through schema.org, so that we point to the associated digital artifacts that are related to that particular object. So really, from our point of view, kind of the most basic important service that we're doing is to offer these standard protocols for other agents to sort of interrogate and get the indexes for all of the items that are within our system. So at its most basic, we have a little gateway server at the front of this system. That gateway shunts requests that are coming to various types of services in the back end. For Fedora, we actually make the linked data protocol available to the public as well. It's a really nice protocol, so we don't try to hide that and let everybody else have the same access to the data as we do. And then for the SEO in this components, we have an additional client back there that the gateway shunts those requests to as well. And then by following that standard, that is the way that we communicate kind of all of the information about all of the items in our collections. First to Calisphere, which is the overall University of California Library of Digital Components. And from there, it makes it into the Digital Public Libraries of America. And as I said before, because we're using the SEO for that, it's the same methodology that search engines like Google would use to discover individual objects in the system. There are some painful bits about using schema.org. Primarily, the reason that we can't use the direct LDP for that is that we have to add additional sort of clues in for our users in that. Typically, it's like we need to label things that are unique links within the Fedora items. And then we might also do stuff like add common thumbnail to every single object in the system. As I said before, we've organized our data in one way using schema.org, but somebody else might come up with a different methodology. It's not super clear how you would do that. In the schema.org, there's not a lot of archival metadata that's in there. And then the other thing that we found is that when we're actually trying to build the user interface, the description of the artifacts themselves is good kind of for maintaining an kind of an archival record, but there's lots of things that are missing for when you want to build a nice rich user experience. So we end up putting in what we call clues, which are additional predicates that we've defined that sort of help our HTML application understand a little bit more in detail about what the underlying objects are and how they're represented. So this is where you might say, you know, you have a list of images, but they have to be ordered in a certain way because they correspond to pages. Or if you're looking at an image that should be considered a 360 view or a video or text that should be used for indexing the photos and things like that. This is just another quick summary of the organization of the artifacts within our system. Some important things here is that right now we don't really have standards in where we locate them. So under this collection, for example, Eastman here, the artifacts are kind of organized by some library codes, and we don't have a specification necessarily for that. And then on the right-hand side, you can see we might have the original digital version of this might be a TIFF, but since that TIFF isn't available, you know, can't be used directly by our client, we have to build other associated media and then point to that so the client understands how to work from those components. And then the other thing to note on this is that the identifier section has these unique identifiers that I talked about before, and these can be locally resolved through our system as well. So if people go and ask directly for one of these artifacts via their identifiers, those can come up too. As I said, the way that we come up with unique IDs primarily is using archival resource keys, ARCs. Those we like quite a bit. They're very easy to maintain. Their resolution scheme on a global scale is really nice. It's easy to come up with best practices for that. And there's a nice extensibility about those where if you have one of these universal identifiers, it will pass the suffix component beyond the beginning of that onto the local resolution. And what this means is that it gives us a way to add universal identifiers to not just the objects itself, but to every component within the object as well, which is very nice for us. Some of our objects also use library call numbers, which aligns a lot with the current library practice, and that's kind of mixed in with other cataloging tools that exist. In terms of Fedora, we use most of the other specifications. We do use web access control. The authorization system is via CAS, but then we share tokens for the authorization. Notifications we use to update our indexes. We don't use a lot of versioning right now in our system. The way that we extend it is that, as I said, we have this gateway, and the gateway actually reads the paths and intercepts the paths that go into the system, and they might either go directly to Fedora, or if there's services that are built on top of that, it can actually instead send those requests directly to those services. And then those services typically can look back to Fedora as well, make modifications to it, and then output that path. And so that's how we do transforms, to transform, for example, from our linked data metadata to other forms of the metadata. And our whole client is actually written that way. So when the system starts up, the gateway actually looks to see if there's a client service, and it actually uses that to build the entire website that we use. And we found that's really nice because it offers a really good separation between the user experience through the UI compared to all of the other different services that we're offering through the system. So an expanded version of the architecture just has all of these additional services which offer a whole bunch of new different pathways to the user that can be used, and synchronizing the Fedora to the search interfaces and the indexes that we use. And so for Fedora 6, we were looking forward to a number of different things, but primarily the thing that we were most interested in was the Oxford Common File layout. We think that that has a lot of potential to make things more simple for us in some of our the practices that we're looking for. And the most obvious one is to have an easier methodology of storing the digital objects for long-term management. And so our idea is that this is something that wouldn't necessarily, it's very important for us to use for our own local long-term archives, but this is also a good potential for us to share complete artifacts directly with users so that we can show them all of the components that make something up, or even with other digital access management systems. And as long as there's enough logical layout for that, that should be sort of completely agnostic to what the type of digital system that you're running. So you don't have to be running Fedora, or you don't have to be running a linked data protocol that we see in order to be able to upload that into your system. That would kind of be how we envision sharing that, is kind of how you would expect. You drill down for a particular artifact and find all of the components under that root, bundle them together and ship them along. This is where we do run into these problems with identifiers, and so this is something we're going to have to look at in more detail. Because we've been so kind of fast and loose for naming within our current system, there's more of a potential for collisions, name collisions with other systems. And so we have to look in to see if we want to be more specific about how we attach universal identifiers to our assets. And then the other component on this is that I don't know if it's the layout definition in OCFL that's the best section for this, but we kind of envision that that somebody else describes the overall representation of how Fedora or the linked data protocol is represented within OCFL. And then we would layer on top of that our definition of how we use schema.org, how we archive, how we associate media. And with that definition would hopefully be enough to describe the packages that we're sharing completely. So the next steps that we're doing is we're just in the process of exercising Fedora 6 for some of our sets. That's going to involve us to update a lot of our local tooling for getting data into the Fedora system. And like I said, we might look to standardize some of these artifacts. In the long term, I think this leads to better metadata options for us. And then we're looking to expand our types of data outside of just special collections and to look into more of data science projects as well. And that's it.